Hey guys, it's Mitch. How's it going? I've made you wait a little bit for your CEREBUS fix, but wait no longer because we're taking a look today at CEREBUS number 19 and 20. So just before we get into it, if you enjoy the channel, if you feel like you might want to help out a little bit, go subscribe on my Patreon. Links are in the description, gives you early access to everything I do, helps out the channel, helps to buy new comics. Alright, so we've done a couple of these. We should be pretty much in the groove. I think I've got like 7 of these under my belt. It's okay, we're only getting started. We got a long way to go. Thankfully with CEREBUS, at least at this point, backstory isn't super important, at least not up front. We don't need you to know where CEREBUS is in the world. There's little bits here and there that are more like running gags or callbacks, but we can explain those when we get to them. For the most part, we just need to know that CEREBUS is in the company of the Tagitans, which are a warlike, Germanic race, and they've managed to take over a fort that was on the edge of Palnan territory. So that's pretty much still where we are. That's kind of where we've been for the last couple of issues. Although this doesn't really feel like issues 14 through 16, which was the Palnu trilogy. It doesn't have that same kind of through line. It's just more like, let's keep CEREBUS in this place here. Why not? I've got some more things he can do in this situation. So we might as well get right into this. Let's start with the cover. It's not the most in-depth, detailed kind of cover, but it's a reasonably striking image. Kind of along the lines of a fantasy just drawing. And I think this is maybe a little bit of a milestone in that this feels like the first time Dave felt comfortable enough with how he drew women to feature tits as a main part of the cover. Which is important, I think. The earlier issues, he didn't really know what he was doing when it came to drawing women. So issue 3, issue 6, that kind of thing. Issue 6 is largely about introducing the character Jaka. Jaka isn't featured on the cover, which says to me, he wasn't confident enough with how he drew women to feature one on the cover. I think that's changed now. I mean, if you don't know what's going on in this issue, this cover is still a mystery, so we might as well just get right into it. Alright, so this is She-Devil in the Shadows. And something we're getting used to from Dave is, the nice title treatment. It's definitely something he's focusing on at this point. So we're opening up into Gith. So I believe that's a city that's nearby to the fort where they sacked. And Gith is a big city. The warrior that CEREBUS has been spending the most time with, Graus, has been kind of waylaid by just how much stuff there is to do in a big city. And I mean, they've got all sorts of loot, and Graus has been happily spending it all on everything he can find. Currently, he's stuck in this one woman's house. This is Perse. Perse is an interesting character in this, actually, because Dave decided to base her on his sister-in-law, because she was around the same age of the character. He's like, oh shit, that'll be easy. I've got all sorts of reference material. And then by the time he finished the issue, he's like, that's never happening again. If I'm basing it on somebody, it's going to be a ridiculous caricature. But we start things off with our familiar opening splash with Graus in Perse's house here. And it's a nicely rendered interior of a medieval type house. Not just the amount of lines, but also different textures all over the place here. Even managed a cat in here. I'm guessing that's his sister-in-law's cat. So, okay, this is Perse here. It's a pretty good drawing of a 20-year-old woman, but he had to work at that quite a bit to get it looking pretty close to the original. So, again, wasn't going to happen after this. So, CEREBUS is not too happy with the fact Graus has been missing for a while. Perse here claims that she's just been telling his fortune. CEREBUS is like, nobody gets their fortune told for 3 fucking hours. And she doesn't even really try to defend herself. She's just like, well, what about it? I gotta pay my rent too. And it's just a fun little opening bit, kind of setting the stage for where we are. And from there, we're going to flip back to Palnu. This is Lord Julius's opponent, Lord Gorse. So Dave had it in his mind that he wanted to set Lord Gorse up as like a serious adversary for Lord Julius, because he didn't want to give the impression that Lord Julius was just where he was in the political structure in Palnu because of happenstance. He just lucked himself into it. He wanted to illustrate that he was able to keep ahead of all these other conniving politicians, schemers, all that kind of shit, because he was the best of the schemers, and because he was more quick-witted than them. In a Groucho kind of way, Here we've got Lord Gorse, and he's having meetings with other dignitaries that aren't necessarily happy with having Lord Julius in charge of everything, because Lord Julius just does whatever the fuck he wants, and it doesn't usually make sense. So he's just making some alliances in the meantime. He's going out on campaign against the Tagitans, and when he gets back, he's planning on holding elections for the new Grand Lord of Palnu, and he's planning on scheduling these pretty much back-to-back. So, it'll be win the campaign, triumph back in Palnu, next day elections. Who should I vote for? And these sequences here, they're not the most fun thing. I mean, like in terms of visually, there's not a ton going on. We get some fun expressions here and there. That's kind of it. The dialogue is all right. This is basically like a trial run for what's going to happen from issue 26 on in the High Society storyline. All sorts of plotting and scheming and political backstabbery. From there, we cut to CEREBUS, who's meeting with one of his old smuggler buddies. Although he's not a smuggler anymore, he's kind of rebranded himself as an importer-exporter. And in particular, he's focused on importing limp-wristed statues. It's 1980, it's an independent book, you can get away with that. Plus, it's not like it's not grounded in any kind of reality. So CEREBUS is approaching him about trying to get some soldiers that they can march on Pal Nu with. Particularly, he's looking for pike and cavalry. And the importer in this case is like, well, that's going to be a little bit tough to kind of fulfill. Armies in particular are getting extremely expensive. It seems like everybody's got a war going on these days. So I think what you have actually isn't really enough. We can negotiate a little bit. Take this owl here. And he's like, oh, so the owl's worth like a fortune, right? And he's like, well, look, if you're going to get all cynical on me, it's like, is it worth a fortune or not? Yes, of course it's worth a fortune. But if you know that, then there's no fun in swindling you. He's like, sorry, my bad. Okay, continue. So on its own, the owl is not particularly valuable, but it is a set of two. And if he can come back with the other one, then that would be enough to get him all the heavy pike he wants, all the heavy cavalry, and set him up nicely for whatever campaign he has in mind going forward. And he happens to know the location it was last spotted in, so he just needs CEREBUS to go and acquire it. He can't do it himself, he's legitimate now, or so the rumor goes. Alright, so CEREBUS heads off for the owl's last known location. It's a pub off somewhere. Decent looking little page here. And he's kind of going through what his cover story is going to be. Because that's what we've gotten used to from CEREBUS at this point. He's always got some scam he's running on somebody where he can just improv and come up with something, and he kind of sweeps everybody along with just the force of his improv. So he's trying to come up with something about killer termites, which isn't a very good improv in my opinion, but it's okay because he gets to the pub and immediately the owner of the pub goes, you have to get down there. Something's been killing all of my patrons. And CEREBUS is just like, you haven't seen any termites around here, have you? Like, what? No, nothing. Go ahead. And this is a fun panel here with the uplighting. So CEREBUS is going to go into a very easy to draw page. Good for you, Dave. He's going to go check out the cellar, which is almost completely black, although I like this with the stairs where all you see is the tops of the stairs and some very deep lighting on CEREBUS himself. And everybody up in the bar is making bits as to how far he gets. Obviously, he won't get all the way to the where he's going, which is the apartment in the basement. Something in between the cellar door and the door to the basement apartment always gets whoever tries to go down here. And as CEREBUS creeps further along, he's met by someone who looks an awful lot like Red Sophia. And takes a swing at him immediately. CEREBUS is like, okay, that's definitely not Red Sophia. She was nowhere near that skilled. And he has to try and fight her off, and he almost doesn't make it. She kind of cuts him off at every pass, and you can see the door and everything. Gets his sword knocked out of his hand, makes a show of trying to grab it, and she goes to cut him off again. But when she does, he scampers around her and manages to throw himself through the door and slam it shut. Oh, time for another brief interlude. As a dignitary tries to tell Lord Julius that he's been ousted, the Pal Nu Crisis Board of Impeachment Inquiry has decided to take action against him, and he's like, I've already heard from you. Like, you guys have been infiltrated. He's like, what? We've been very careful. And just, talk circles around him until he leaves with absolutely no confidence left in his whatever he was going in there with. So this is the Lord Julius that Dave wants to explore, the one who stays ahead of all his competitors through perfect comedic timing, essentially. Back in the basement, the resident in question is Henrod, who we last saw, and he was presented as Red Sophia's father. After this, though, it seems a bit more likely he was Red Sophia's creator, because Henrod, of course, is based on Frank Thorne, who is the creator of Red Sonja, and Gita, which is who this particular issue is about. So here we get the story of the creation of Gita. And Gita was a comic that Frank Thorne was drawing in the 70s, which was basically Red Sonja, only porn. So naturally, Gita is a bit more voluptuous than Red Sophia. As CEREBUS says here, you wanted them to hang to her knees. And he's like, precisely. No, absolutely not. We get the undoubtedly creepy shots here of Henrod drooling over his creation as he makes it. And he soon realized that Gita was a serious problem because, while she did possess incredible talent with a sword, and had dynamite knockers, no doubt. She was also extremely foul-tempered and would start fights with anybody at the drop of a hat, started bringing home heads and spare limbs, constantly drunk, and basically making Henrot's life a living misery. So he figures, I had two choices. Either I could send her out to conquer the separate empire and move while she was gone, and Sarah's like, or you can make her your personal watchdog. I was afraid she would defeat the Emperor's legions in return before I got everything packed. These are some really fun pages, too. Like, he's having a whole lot of fun with, like, the character here of Henrot, just the expressions and everything. And I think he's having some fun just making Gita be just hanging out all over the place. And he's also got these little cartoon magical burbly creatures that keep floating around Henrot, which will come into the story in a moment here. Anyway, he was able to imprison her one night after she was drunk, and her magical defenses immediately went back up. She'll never be fooled that way again, but at least for the moment, she's stuck there, and all she can do is take out her frustration on anybody who tries to get to Henrot. And Henrot has to break the bad news to CEREBUS that, sorry buddy, you're kind of stuck living here now, because there's no way you can ever get past her. My magic will never fool her, and she's just a better swordsman than you. So, like, I don't know, get comfy. And obviously CEREBUS gets pissed about that, and we find out that the little burbly creatures are actually, they're there to feed off of Henrot's negative emotions. Apparently these are magical pets that they keep around to make sure they don't just get too worked up. You know, doing magic on high-octane emotions is a little bit potentially explosive. But that does give CEREBUS an idea on how to maybe escape from the basement. But before he goes, he does have to talk about what he came there for, which is the owl. I asked Henrot if he remembers what the owl was. He's like, I think so. It sounds familiar. If I ever did have it, I melted it down for elements in an incantation long ago. But I can conjure up something that looks like it and, you know, will hold its shape for a little while if that works for you. He's like, yeah, that works perfect. Okay. So it comes up with the twin of the owl. He's able to pretty much remember what it looked like. And goes to leave. Opens the door, insults Gita a little bit before he goes, just to make sure she's paying attention, and then opens the door wide for the Gerbies to go and bury her, and just, like, feed off her emotions forever, basically. So, nice little kind of clever element that got kind of slowly worked in there. Because the Gerbies were here when Henrot was first introduced, and then they kind of slowly became a more obvious element in the scene, and then they got explained, and then they were used, and then it's like, okay, this is how we use them to get out of the scene. It's actually kind of nicely constructed, really. So with the owl in tow, CEREBUS is able to return to his Captain buddies. I guess they're going to go and get those pike and cavalry, and then they can go on the march. Before he does, he has to go and collect grouse, though, from Perse, the fortune teller, in quotes. And they're just about to head out when she offers him a drink. CEREBUS never says no to a drink, and when he does take it, he gets roofied something heavy. And Perse tells Grouse that, yeah, CEREBUS is just going to stay with me for a little while. He said, you can go right ahead. And that's where we're going to end this issue. So setting up the next one, the Aardvark comments are starting to get a little bit more full, which is nice. Now, and he's got a feature in here about the Aardvarkian age by Michael Lubert, who is his wife's brother, of course. And it's just lore stuff about the surrounding area. I don't think I've ever read that stuff. Okay, that is CEREBUS number 19. CEREBUS number 20. I don't know if I'm going to have as much to say about this one. So this is a very interesting issue, actually, in terms of the form itself, really, which is something that becomes more and more apparent as the CEREBUS comic kind of progresses, is that once Dave realized that he could do anything he wanted with his comic, that also meant he could do things no one had ever done before in a comic. Now, some of those things are maybe kind of dumb. Maybe don't alienate your audience with a long-winded anti-feminist rant. Some of them, though, are kind of interesting. So enter issue 20. This is Mind Game. Odd cover, really. I got the feeling Dave didn't really know what to put on the cover for this one. This feels like a character reference sheet. Like, these are the many moods of CEREBUS. So, this one all takes place in CEREBUS's head. And I believe this is the introduction of a couple of factions that are going to be major players in the CEREBUS storyline eventually. So we're going to get our first mention of the Sirenists and the Kevalists in this issue. They aren't portrayed as that big of a deal at this time, but, I mean, they will eventually kind of take over the political landscape of the book. So it turns out that Perse, the fortune-telling prostitute from issue 19, was actually a Sirenist mole. And she has now captured CEREBUS because aardvarks are good for, I don't know, coming up with prophecies, some shit like that. So she's got him in this like mostly comatose state where he's lucid. He can understand what she's saying and he can form coherent thoughts and responses, but he can't move and he can't open his eyes, anything like that. So when we turn the page here, this is going to be what we're going to get for this issue, which is basically Cerebus, just the figure of Cerebus wandering around in this black background with occasionally gray kind of borders breaking things up. And it turns out that the gray panels in between that, again, kind of break things up are a different conversation that he ends up having with somebody called Swentus Poe, who is another character who's going to come back quite a bit in the Cerebus story. But at this point, Swentus Poe is essentially like a hophead. He's big on achieving spiritual enlightenment by taking a shitload of drugs. And this is some elevated sphere of consciousness. I don't think they say this is the seventh sphere. The seventh sphere comes back a lot, again, in the pages of Cerebus, but I don't think we're there just yet. So all the black is the conversation that he's having with the Sirenists. All the gray is the conversation that he's having with the illusionists. And the story itself is kind of inconsequential, I would say. It's fun stuff where he's just kind of talking circles around both parties, really. But the larger point of this issue is actually the design with the gray. If you've been staring at this long enough, you might realize, wait a minute, that looks like something. Yes, this is the top of Cerebus's head. So, this is based on a Neil Adams page design idea, in which the outline of the page was actually the main character's head or a particular character's head, something like that. And it was kind of like a hidden head. Like you didn't, if you weren't looking for it, you might not see it. And Dave thought that was incredible. He's like, oh, I got to try something like that. So what he decided to do was basically have a hidden Cerebus, like a full-bodied Cerebus hidden throughout this entire issue. So here we've got the top of Cerebus's head. These are the ears. Again, we've got his hand here, and using them all as different panel borders. And the way he had to do this was basically he drew the largest picture of Cerebus he could think of, and he had an idea for where he wanted the story to go, and he basically had to just kind of riff on it and figure out how to work it into this giant picture that he designed. All this gray here is crosshatched too. I guess you can't use zipatone because that would kind of blend in with the Cerebus zipatone. That must have sucked a bit. So anyway, the storyline is the Sirenists have Cerebus captive, and they're trying to get a prophecy out of him. And because he has Swentus Poe with him, that only they can't hear it, he's able to kind of confer with him and figure out how to navigate around these Sirenists, basically figure out what they want and how to make them go away. It's a bit of a problem because Swentus Poe realizes that unless they get the prophecy they want, they're going to kill him, and shortly. But they are able to figure it out eventually. They come up with the code phrase that the Sirenists have been waiting for, which is that the rebirth is at hand, and the Sirenists are all aflutter. And now Cerebus will live a life of luxury in a semi-comatose state, being kept on a subsistence diet, and basically stuck in this sphere here for the rest of his life. And he's like, yeah, that's not very good. Nope, we're going to have to find a way around that. So go back to chat with Poe again. And they're going to have to come up with a scheme to try and get the Sirenists' attention and kind of distract them, get them away from the shop where Cerebus is being held. And again, you can see that Cerebus starting to creep in. We got the shoulder and the arm. This is the head, the mouth. And it's like, how do you do this and not have it be obvious on the next page? Because that's, most of Cerebus's face. It's like, well, what if you just do a close-up of Cerebus's face? Makes sense? I'm sure there were some people who figured it out right away. And I'm just as sure that there were some people who, never saw it, basically. I think the first time I read this, I was kind of half reading it. It didn't make a ton of sense to me anyway. So I wasn't on the lookout for this stuff. And yeah, just kind of a fun story with him. Like I said, talking circles around everybody. And yeah, here's the fist, here's the legs and everything, but it doesn't necessarily look like that. It just looks like weird panels. But weirdness is kind of to be expected so far in this story anyway. So Cerebus is able to work the Sirenists up into a frenzy over the illusionists. He says the illusionists are planning something big. They're going to go and stage a coup of some kind. And they absolutely have to be stopped. He's overheard Swentus Poe, of all people, in the seventh sphere. And, trying to work them up into a froth. Meanwhile, he checks back in with Swentus Poe. It's like, how are your buddies doing? Are you were you able to get enough of them together to make for a good distraction? He's like, oh shit, yeah, man, almost half of them are sober. So he's managed to convince the illusionists to run to the clothing store across the street from Perce's fortune-telling hut and break the window and tear down all the clothes, and he's going to try and get them to light them all on fire. The only problem is nobody thought to bring a torch. They did bring some matches, though, so they have something to work with. So the Sirenists, who have been worked up into a lather, are just a little bit confused now on why it's important that they stop this bunch of weedy drug addicts that are just fucking with some clothes, like out of a display. And Cerebus is just like, oh, you know what? That wasn't even the real uprising. It's actually, that's just a distraction. The real uprising is way across town. You have to go now. And figuring that they'll leave him, he'll wake up before they get back and he can escape. Except that they put another drug down his throat before they leave, just to make sure he doesn't go anywhere. And he kind of floats off into blackness again. And that's the end of that issue. So yeah, like the actual issue itself, an interesting little experiment, I think. Not the most consequential, like nothing really in terms of plot. Oh, we do get a milk and cheese single page in this one. Is this the first appearance of milk and cheese? I feel like it is, or pretty close to anyway. It's a pretty early edition of them. I did enjoy milk and cheese quite a bit. I had the trade when I was younger. Anyway. That is it for Cerebus number 19 and 20. Just kind of interesting tweener issues that stand alone on their own. They do fit into the larger storyline, but only kind of peripherally, really. The more interesting thing is how Dave is growing as a cartoonist around this time. Like, issue 19 is probably the best-looking issue of Cerebus that has been created up until this point. And issue 20 is like a really interesting experiment with pushing the form. So, I mean, I'll put up the assembled version of what these pages look like. And I mean, it's a pretty rough drawing. You know, assembled, it's like, oh, that's not the best drawing of Cerebus, but like this thing would have been fucking massive. You got to think that's 20 pages. So like 5 pages across at the top, 4 pages long going down. And he says here, the individual pages were 50 inches by 60 inches. And he says inside that, I think the dimensions of the gigantic frame are 50 inches by 60 inches. So 4 feet by 5. And you're just trying to draw something that's like legible at that point. And probably trying to twist it up a little bit so it isn't obvious that this is Cerebus in between. But it's cool seeing it in its assembled state, and it's fun watching Dave try and push the boundaries of what he can do in his comic book. We're going to see a lot more examples if I stick with this, which, I mean, you know, I will for a little while at least. Mind Game itself would become a bit of a staple in the Cerebus storyline. Not necessarily one that people were looking forward to, I would say, a lot of the time, because it would sometimes turn into just stream of consciousness, abstract, like, wankery. Every once in a while. Not always, but, you know, sometimes. That was what you got. But he kicked things off in a very interesting way here, at least. And I'm interested to kind of keep my eye out for whatever the next thing is. I don't remember exactly in sequence. So we'll find out when we get to it. But for this one, anyway, that's going to do it. Thanks very much for watching. If you like this video, please hit like, hit subscribe, hit the notification so you know when the next one's coming out. Go over and subscribe on my Patreon. Gives you early access to everything I do, from the Blood Force stuff to the YouTube videos before they get uploaded to YouTube, as well as some Patreon exclusive content. You can also follow me on Instagram and DM me there for commissions, and you can join the Blood Force Discord server. Oh yeah, that's going to do it. Thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.